Tonight on The Goat Show.
Good for you.
I just got married in 2024.
How do you view the Bible?
Sky Daddy, if you will.
This happened to me on BBC.
The perfect squares.
When you say human trafficking,
Good, articulate thought police.
And talking about walking into places like you own it.
they're progressive. They're making progress. Welcome to The Goat Show, the show where we celebrate and debate all things great. My name is ZiLLY. I am joined by my co-hosts, Fresh and Deezy. Gentlemen, good to see you today. We're going to get right into it because we have an amazing guest today, and there's so much to discuss with him. And his adventures that he's been on and his story is amazing. So, for anybody watching right now, Fresh, what do they have to do?
You gotta like, you gotta subscribe, you gotta hit the bell, you gotta send it to your mom, your aunt, your dad, your uncle, everybody you know, because everybody's gonna want to watch this one.
For sure. You definitely do not want to miss this episode. Our guest today is a gentleman by the name of Larry Taunton. And he from what I've gathered and what Grok has told me, he's an author, a columnist, a cultural commentator, and I believe a self-described Christian apologist. We'll get into that. I'm not even sure what that is, to be honest with you guys. So we'll talk about that. But before we do, I think we have a message from our sponsor.
Water, the source of life. It's been privatized, polluted, abused, and reused. Do you know what's in your water? Drugs, plastics, chemicals, pesticides. But there is hope. There are people working around the clock to make a difference. The solution is advanced filtration that not only removes toxins, but balances the pH in the water. Go to centuryh2o.com to tap into wellness.
Okay, we're back. All right, Larry Taunton, how's it going? How are you doing? Where are you speaking to us from?
It's good to be with you guys. I am currently in Rome, not the Rome in Georgia, but the one that is in Italy.
And I don't know if you want to give your exact location, but I'm seeing that view behind you. It looks amazing. What is your relationship with Rome? Is it something new for you, or have you been traveling there over the years?
No, I've been here many times, and in fact, this is my second time here already this year. Rome is kind of my European office, so to speak. I don't have a formal office here, but I try to push all the things that I have to do in Western, Eastern Europe, Africa, all to, more or less the same time period. And then I work out of Rome, and then I make my way to Africa and Eastern Europe and Western Europe and so forth. But I love it here. I love the food. I enjoy the people. The history is fascinating. The climate is more to my liking. So yeah, it's not as expensive as some of the other European capitals. Paris, for instance, London is insanely expensive, and it's much more reasonable.
Fantastic. Well, I want to get into all that stuff that you just mentioned. Your many adventures around the world, your life as a historian and a writer and a journalist and a novelist. But the way we know you is Deezy, our illustrious co-host here. I believe he was hanging out in some X spaces. You were speaking in one. He decided to reach out because he really loved your story. So yeah, something we do on the show is we like to ask two questions. So the first question that we ask every guest is,
I'm heterosexual.
Maybe we should start asking that question. That might be a prerequisite. We have to start asking our guests.
And go to the Polish-Ukrainian border.
All right. Well, three questions then. Second one is, if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Well, that's a very good question. So within the universe of existing superpowers, I always thought that the Flash was pretty cool. I was just a slow white guy. When I played, football in high school, I think my best 40 was like a 4.9, which, in the white universe is maybe pretty good, but I wasn't I just, I just wasn't that fast. And so I wished that I could run. I've watched, I grew up in the era, Bo Jackson's a little older than me, but I grew up in the era of, say, a Bo Jackson. And I just remember thinking, what must it be like to run like the wind like that? So, yeah, that's what I'd be. I'd run fast. And by the way, I've needed that more than once, given what I do for a living.
Yeah, from what I've seen recently, you definitely could use that superpower. And I would love to have that flash power so I could just do a lot more faster, but because I'm just a slowpoke Indian. All right, so the final question, well, or at least the final of the 3 template questions we ask on the show. What is your superhero origin story? So let's get started in sort of who are you? Where are you from? Grow up?
You guys are too young to get this joke, but maybe there's some people who will get it. I was born a poor black child, and that's a reference to an iconic movie of my generation called The Jerk with Steve Martin, which begins with that narration. My origin story would be rags to riches. That's what I would want. Is he's a guy who worked his way up, and yeah, and he's a human. He's from this planet, but he has a special power. He can run fast, and he's been given a special mission.
Well, okay. From what I researched, you grew up in Georgia. Is that correct? In a military family. Is that the idea?
Well, yes and no. I was born at Fort Benning, and my father was career military. He was an airborne ranger and was in the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions. And so, if you know anything about military life, particularly, during the Korean Vietnam War eras, Korea predates me, but I was born in the summer of love. So I was born at at the height of Vietnam, and so we moved everywhere. So I lived at Fort Benning, Georgia, Fort Gordon, Georgia, Fort Campbell, Kentucky, Fort Lewis, in just outside of Seattle, and a few other places. So, but mostly in the American South. Usually colloquial. My father's from L.A., which is Lower Alabama, and my mom is a Canadian. She's from Vancouver Island. So I kind of grew up between 2 very different worlds, with pictures of the Queen in our house and black eyed peas and grits.
My personal history is very much in the South, and Virginia and Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Georgia, and those places. But so I get a sense of some of the things that you're talking about.
And my history is very Canadian, so I feel the pictures of the Queen in the house and all that stuff.
Yeah, there you go. Well, as everybody is any colonist would know, or any Brit, I should say, would know, the colonists are far more British than the British. The British have no pride in their own country and in their own history. But, my Canadian grandparents and my Canadian family, they were all very, very, very very much Anglophiles, so I grew up with those kind of traditions.
A lot of what you, or from at least from what we've have researched, a lot of what you talk about, or a common thread between the various things that you investigate and write about is Christian faith. And so I'm kind of curious, from that young age until now, what is that spiritual side? What's that spiritual journey there? Were you always religious, or was there a time where that wasn't as much in your life and then it developed over time? Can you maybe speak on that and where that comes from?
That's an excellent question. No, I grew up, Canadians are not particularly religious as a rule. And, it's just much more secular. And my father wasn't a churchgoer, so that wasn't really a big thing. I wouldn't say that we were a religious family, but I was thinking through these kind of issues, at a pretty early age, as to kind of asking the question, who am I and why am I here? And I really flirted with a lot of atheism, so I was reading the Transcendentalists, and I was reading a lot of Friedrich Nietzsche. If Richard Dawkins had been around at the time, he was around at the time, but he wasn't pontificating on atheism at the time. I would probably, have been reading a lot of Dawkins or guys like him. But I kind of found myself coming to a place where, youth will tolerate a lot, but hypocrisy they won't tolerate. And I kind of came to the conclusion that almost every atheist I read, first of all, I didn't find them logically consistent. In other words, if you're going to suggest that there's no meaning in life, Nietzsche found his meaning in life by going around and telling everybody there was no meaning in life. And I kind of found myself thinking, well, that's kind of hypocritical. And secondly, that takes you down a rabbit hole of utter meaninglessness. It takes you down a rabbit hole where nothing is real. It means that there's no morality, that even your love is just a Darwinian impulse to perpetuate the species. It means there's no hope, there's no ultimate justice, there's no reward, no punishment. There's just what happens. And that has no more validity than the rules that regulate a colony of ants. So I found that fairly troubling. And I encountered, while I was quite young, some very thoughtful Christians who began to engage my mind, began to engage me in a very thoughtful way. They weren't afraid of difficult questions. Some of the Christians I'd met could find them quite threatening, like you're not allowed to ask those questions. And that kind of Christianity, which is actually no Christianity at all, might have extinguished my faith, honestly, or what little there was. But instead, I was sort of invited, come on, ask your questions, bring it. What is it that you're struggling with? What is it that you find very hard? And that led me to people who mentored me, who gave me excellent books to read. And it became a real passion for me because I kind of reached a place in my life, although it was a classic song by the time I was in high school. I can remember listening very carefully. I was the sort who was always listening to lyrics of songs. A lot of people don't listen to songs. I listen, and I'm thinking to myself, what is this song actually saying? And a lot of times you find yourself going, oh my gosh, what am I actually talking about here, Nicki Minaj? Or whatever. But I can remember relating very strongly to Kansas's song "Dust in the Wind." Don't hang on, nothing lasts forever, but the earth and sky, it slips away, and all your money won't another minute buy. Dust in the wind, all we are is dust in the wind. And I thought, you know what? If there is no God, that is 100% correct. It just means I'm just a product of random chance and necessity. And so my rebellion never took the form of, I never did drugs. I wasn't out partying and, that kind of thing. My rebellion took the form of sort of opting out. I was just sort of saying, I'm not participating in your system, and I'll never forget asking, one of my teachers when I'm sure he thought I was a very, was a real smart ass. But when I was a freshman in high school and when I was really, really struggling with these things, I remember asking him what the purpose of life was. I'm sure he thought, what in the world? I mean, this is biology class, and what's this kid, doing asking me this? But I remember, and the way I put it to him was I said, as I understand it, the purpose is that I'm supposed to spend like the first, 17, 18 years of my life. And if I go to college, say 22 years of my life, I go to graduate school, 25, 26 years of my life, getting an education. That I spend the next 30 or 40 years of my life accumulating wealth. And then I spend the last, 15 years of my life trying to coast as comfortably as possible in the grave. So if I understand it correctly, the point of life is to get from point A to point Z as comfortably as possible. Is that it? And he's like, go sit down. but go sit down and be quiet and turn in your homework. But I really began sort of opting out of school. I was this close to being a dropout. And I thought, you know what? If that's all that life is, I don't want to waste any more time at school. I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to be a cog in your machine. And but somewhere along the way, I became a Christian, and I met my wonderful wife, who's sitting off over here. I met her when I was in high school, and she had a very strong belief, and
Really?
sure did. Yep, we were high school sweethearts. And
I mean, but when did you get? Because I kind of want to.
we were 19.
Wow. Okay. So
Yes, we were very young. Listen, you guys look to me to be pretty young, but I'm going to assume if you answered affirmative to the first question I was answered that you're heterosexual, then I will assume that you guys have had or have a lady in your life. And a relationship, as I would tell my boys, who are maybe about the same age as you guys, a relationship moves naturally through a progression. And how rapidly it moves through that progression really depends on how intense the relationship is, meaning it can stretch out over many years if you don't see each other very much and it's a long distance relationship. If you are, as we were, high school together, we saw each other every day, in class every day, and went out on dates, as many times a week as we possibly could, and then went to college together and this kind of thing. It moves rapidly through a progression, and you get to a place where either you get married or the relationship begins to fall apart. That's what happens. So this idea that you can, you're just going to drag the relationship out for, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's just, it's not untenable. It's untenable. It's not workable. And I tell my boys, this relationship is becoming, pretty intense. And I just want to tell you, by this age, you're going to be ready to get married, and you need to think about it. You need to think about where you're headed in this relationship. As your dad, I'm not telling you should or shouldn't. I'm just telling you that that's what's going to happen. And that was the case for us. But I would say that marrying young, while it was very hard for us financially, we decided we could be poor separately or we could be poor together. And pool what little resources we had. And I will tell you, it made me a much more serious person because I realized I can't mess about anymore. This is the real deal. And my wife always had a very, very strong belief in my ability. And long before I ever did, she had a strong belief in my ability. And the rest is history.
I mean, that sounds like the person you want to marry, right? The person that believes in you when you don't even believe in yourself yet. So that's amazing.
Absolutely. Find you a girl like that.
I just got married in 2024.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Presumably you have such a woman in your life. So congratulations to you.
I met her also in junior high. We're junior high sweethearts, separated, stayed friends, and then, met back up as adults. And now, 5 years later, here we are married.
Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
This is not supposed to be Dr. Phil, but I'm going to give you some advice. How old are you?
I just turned 30.
How old is she, if I may ask?
She's about to be 30.
Start having kids. You will never regret it. Start having kids. There's a reason why infertility is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that's because people have bought into the lie that you can just put off having children until you just, decide. Biology doesn't work like that. There's a very different clock that's ticking. And we have 4 children, but, I look back and I think, I wish you'd had 5 or 6. I mean, honestly, our children, who again are probably about your age, since you just told me your age. They're on both sides of you. A couple of them are a little bit older and a couple of them are a little younger. What a joy they are. And it's particularly now they're old enough to travel with us and things like this. And I find them endlessly interesting.
That's awesome. Yeah, we're planning in the next year or so. I'm going to have a baby Demetrius out here.
Good for you.
Oh, nice.
That's a David off right there, guys. And I'm going to smoke that thing later this evening.
Nice.
Congratulations.
Appreciate it.
Investment in your family is never a waste. It just is never a waste. I know that's not what you brought me on for, but I'm just going to tell you.
Oh, no, we brought you on for you, man.
Yeah, it's all about what you got to say, man. So we're gathering you as a person and your ideas. But it does kind of take me to some questions about, while we're still on the topic of religion, how do you see atheism or just godlessness affecting science and even education today? Do you see God going missing in everything that is being given to the kids and just being propaganded all over the place? So
That's a great question. And let me first say, in response to that I'm not religious. I'm a Christian. And here's what I mean by that. I am an atheist regarding every religion save one. So I don't believe in Zeus or Wotan or, Allah or, I'm not believers in any of those. I consider them all nonsense. And having explored them, I don't find that they're intellectually coherent, that they offer a coherent view or understanding of the world. And that for me is what made Christianity quite compelling for me. When I read other religious texts, they read to me like Marvel comic books. But when you're really seriously engaging the Bible, I mean seriously engaging it, you come away going, "Oh, whoa, this has to be true. This has to be true." And I wrote a book some years ago that got an awful lot of attention. I was named Book of the Year, but it was about my relationship with the well-known atheist Christopher Hitchens. I don't know if you know who he was. He died of esophageal cancer, sadly, but Christopher was a very good friend of mine, and we had debated each other publicly and privately quite a lot. But we liked each other. We got along very well. A lot of what I do is very relational, actually. So a guy like Christopher, I liked Christopher, I respected Christopher, while at the same time calling him out and saying, "That's bullshit. What did you just say? That's just complete nonsense. That what you're spouting there. Not even sure even you believe it." But I remember that he would always be saying these things about Christianity and the Bible, and I would just say, "Look, you're always acting like you read the Bible. Let's study it together." And so I kept provoking him until finally he agreed.
Sorry to interrupt you, but you're telling me that Christopher Hitchens never studied the Bible and he was saying all this stuff? Because at the very least, if you're going to be an atheist and you're going to really defend it, you got to know both sides. Like even I think in anything,
they never do, and they cherry pick it. And so they go to a passage, where it says that God, told Moses to kill the Midianite women, for instance, which is true, but they rip it completely from context, and they don't have a deeper understanding of its message, and that becomes very clear with guys like Dawkins, who I've crossed swords with many times, or Hitchens or others, but with Christopher, I had a personal relationship with him, and I liked him quite a lot. And finally, he agreed to a Bible study. And so we drove from his house in D.C. all the way to mine in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm driving along, and he's got the Bible in his lap. And I said, "Let's look at the Gospel of John together," because I thought this is one that's going to really, really interest him. And so he's drinking a Johnny Walker Black Label as we go along, and I thought, this is great. I'm going to get pulled over and get arrested for open container. But here we are, and he's reading, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And then we would read a few verses and discuss it. And it didn't take long before I realized he's starting to perceive that there's more here than meets the eye, and that it's not the comic book that he's tried to make it out to be. And anyway, I just really, really enjoyed that with Christopher. But anyway, as it relates to your question, if there's a single thread that kind of, all the different activities of different events of my work, like beads, they fit on a single thread. The single thread has been really a defense of the Christian faith. So you were saying at the beginning you weren't sure what it meant to be a Christian apologist, and I'll be honest, I usually don't describe myself that way. It's usually the way others describe me, and I hate it because most people don't know what that means. They think I must go around and apologize for the Crusades, and the Salem witch trials, something like that.
Hey, here's your moment. Here's your moment on the show if you want to.
Yeah, there you go. First Peter chapter 3, verse 15 says, always be ready to give an answer, or it's sometimes translated from Greek as a defense for the hope that is in you. And the word that is there translated as answer or defense is apologia. It's a Greek word, apologia, and it means to give a defense. Where we get our word an apology. An apology, we kind of think of it a little differently, but an apology as a defense. It's a defense, of something. So when we say that someone is a Biden apologist, we mean that he's somebody who defends the indefensible when you're talking about Joe Biden. But anyway, that's what we mean by that. So I prefer to say, I'm a Christian. I take my faith very seriously. I'm a very flawed man, by no means perfect. I need God's grace. But I'm very interested in Christian issues and defending a Christian worldview and perspective in the culture. But that leads me to a lot of commentary on things where, if you've watched my podcast, there are no hallelujahs and organ music in there. I'm just offering commentary from a Christian perspective. And those who listen to my show that know that's what they get. Sometimes it's a little, bare knuckled. That's kind of the world I grew up in, but hopefully it's unashamedly Christian.
I'm kind of curious. How do you view the Bible? Do you view it as, like people say, the Word of God? I mean, do you see it as a sacred document or sacred tome that is, literally from God, or historically, or I mean, what is your perspective on the Bible, and in reading the Bible? How do you recommend people read the Word, and interpret it?
Great question. And my answer is a little nuanced, and it's based on what Scripture itself says. So let's take, for example, my colleague, Lawrence Fox. He's a British actor and activist, well known in his own country. And the two of us do a show together called WTF. And the show, it means World of Taunton and Fox. Anytime you see WTF, that's what everybody's referring to. They're referring to our show. But anyway, in his country, Lawrence lives in London. There's been a lot of discussion about Islam, and he's been very well aware of those Christians. Very recently, a man who was murdered because he burnt a Quran, and he was murdered for it. And I said to Lawrence, you could burn Bibles, because the Christian perspective isn't that, and I don't have one sitting here, but I was just going to grab a book. But the Christian perspective isn't that the book, the physical book, the ink and the pulp to create paper, the binding, the glue, that's holy. So if you took a Bible to fill a pothole, okay, I mean, it's not a very good use of your money, but okay. We don't view the book itself as holy. I mean, that's a book that's made by Crossway or Broadman and Holman or whoever. So when the Bible speaks of God's word as eternal and holy, it's referring to, and in Hebrew thought, unlike Greek thought, words are concrete things. They're not just merely abstractions. They're concrete things. And it's funny, we were just talking about John, studying the Gospel of John. But the Gospel of John begins with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And meaning it's referring to God as the Word, in Greek, the Logos. And I love the way Calvin translated it. He translated it, in the beginning was the speech. Meaning it's this idea of God speaking into the void, and something is created, as a result of it. And it's why the Bible says, thou shalt not, for instance, I'll use the older, the antiquated English that most everybody knows as it relates to the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. So you can say your hells and your shits. Those are maybe vulgar. You can bleep me here if you want to. But But taking the Lord's name in vain is specifically forbidden by Scripture. And why is that? Because it's saying, when you invoke my name, you had better be referring to me and not because you just blew a tire. My name is not to be tossed about casually. My name is not to be invoked casually. It has meaning. And whenever you use it, it had better be with holiness and reverence, because I'm not to be messed about with. I am not some cosmic Santa Claus. And you see, that's what we kind of turned God into. And not only that, we've made the God of the Bible this, he just sort of accepts whatever we do, and it doesn't matter who we are and how we misbehave and any of that stuff. He's just, as I say, kind of a cosmic Santa Claus who affirms us in whatever it is that we want to do, because it's all about us, and that's not a biblical view.
Sky Daddy, if you will.
100%. And you got to be very careful with that, because I remember Christopher Hitchens asking me this question when he was diagnosed with cancer. This will maybe illustrate my point. When he said, all these Christians, because again, he was a celebrated atheist. He said, all these well-known Christian pastors and such sent me all these messages saying they were praying for my healing. He said, but you didn't. Why didn't you? And I said, Christopher, because I'm not so sure that your diagnosis of cancer isn't an act of mercy. And he was startled by that. He said, what do you mean? He said, well, let's think about it. God could have grabbed you by the shirt collar and pulled you into eternity in a nanosecond. But instead, by your own admission, you've told me that you have, maybe a year to live. He has announced he is coming for you. And he is asking you, are you sure that this is the way you want to face me? Are you sure you want to tumble into eternity, blaspheming my name and denying that I exist? Because, to quote C.S. Lewis, that will be a moment of either indescribable joy for the Christian who has put their faith in Jesus Christ, or it will be one of inexplicable terror. Which will it be for you? And I think that caused him deep, deep reflection. What he ultimately decided, I can't know. But that's kind of the point that I'm trying to get at. And for me, that I went from being, feeling that I really didn't have any purpose because Nietzsche and all these people have told me I didn't, to suddenly feeling like, oh my gosh, I do have a mission. I have like the Blues Brothers. I'm on a mission from God, and meaning that I realized that there was a God who was not an impersonal God, but he was personal, very interested in my life, but he wasn't to be trifled with, and he was to be taken very, very seriously, and that it was my responsibility to use what gifts and abilities I did have to honor him and to bring, the good news to people who might not know it, and to give hope to people who are hopeless, and to defend the people who are defenseless. And I try very hard to do all of that. Now, again, I'm a very flawed man. You go on social media, Google me, you will find that I have a lot of enemies. There are a lot of people who don't like me, but I hope what they get is somebody who's very sincere and who's very driven, and who's not motivated by the money. It's not what it is for me.
That kind of leads into the next thing that we kind of wanted to talk to you about is that you are a writer, you are a columnist, a journalist, from what I've seen, and you're traveling the world, and you have your own podcast, and the things that you're doing currently are getting you in trouble, from what I understand. But I wanted to kind of tie that in though with your, what led you, there are a lot of people that have religious faith. What is it that made you go into sort of this sphere of authorship and journalism and podcasting?
Well, what took me in that direction was that Listen, I was my background is academic, so I got my degrees in history, and I taught in an elite preparatory school for quite some time, and I was getting my degrees. I was teaching at Bama and teaching history and some philosophy and literature, and I really enjoyed that. That was a world I really didn't have any intention really of leaving. But something rather unexpected happened, and this is the way all good businesses happen, right? Your mom makes great biscuits, and she's famous in the family for making them. And whenever there is a church dinner, they're always asking her to bring her famous biscuits. And all of a sudden, she finds that she's, the head of a little company that's selling biscuits, and they're going like hotcakes, all over the place, going like hot biscuits, rather. So, for me, the way my work started going was something very similar to that. And it was after 9/11, I had taken a group of my students up to New York to volunteer at Ground Zero. And they didn't allow anybody to volunteer at Ground Zero. But I have a habit of talking people into doing things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And I had suggested to the people in charge there, after I'd heard them on the radio and saying that they had inadequate manpower, I said, what if I bring a bunch of kids from Alabama? They were like, kids from Bama? I mean, not sure what they can do, but they ultimately agreed to it. And it became it became something that captured, on a small scale, national attention. USA Today wrote an article about me and my students working at Ground Zero, and that led to television interviews. It led to and those led to more and more invitations. And suddenly I found myself speaking in a variety of venues from these invitations. And I was thinking, this is a real distraction to my job. I mean, I'm supposed to go and keynote the United Way, or I'm supposed to go and do this, I'm supposed to do that. And pastor of my church said, Larry, you're missing the point. This should be your job. I was like, what? He said, you need to leave teaching. You're getting invitations and opportunities to go places a guy like me will never get. This is what you need to do. You're speaking to a specific need, and you have ability to sort of bridge the gap between Christians in a very secular world. And so Fixed Point Foundation, my organization, was founded. I'd always been writing, as an undergraduate and as a graduate student. I'd always been encouraged in that direction. My thesis, my graduate thesis had been published, and I just kept writing. And eventually Rush Limbaugh, what really caused my writing career to take off, was one day I'm getting texts from a bunch of friends who are saying, Rush Limbaugh is reading your entire article over the air, and he's saying it's brilliant. And by the way, maybe you guys have or haven't been in this world, this particular podcasting world, long enough to know this, but people steal your stuff all the time. It happens to me all the time. It happened to me very recently with a huge account on Twitter. I told the story of what just happened in Cairo as though I wasn't even there, which is pretty funny. And Rush did this. And guys, always do this in your work because it's classy and it will never come back to bite you doing this. He said, this is an article by a guy named Larry Taunton. That's Taunton. He's the executive director of the Fixed Point Foundation. And this is in the USA Today. Then he read the entire article and he said, it is by Larry Taunton. He spelled my name again. Now, that was just a classy thing to do. The way most people do stuff like that is they would read the article, reword it, and pass it off as their own ideas. But Rush didn't do that. And the next thing you know, that article went viral. And the door was suddenly open for me to publish anywhere. And so since then, that's what I've been doing. But one of the things that I really try to do, guys, is, and this is very important to me, is I feel like most of the people in my world who are doing television, radio, podcast commentary, they're frequently pontificating about things they don't know anything about, at least don't have any firsthand experience in it.
That's us. We talking trash all the time, Larry, about things we don't know anything about.
Speak for yourself.
He doesn't speak for all of us.
Well, at least acknowledge it on the front end. But two things I try to do is one is I try to stay in my lane. So Tim Pool, recently invited me to come on and discuss the question, are we living in a simulation? And I told his producer, this is going to be a very short show because I'm going to say no. And where do we go from there for the next 3 hours? And they really wanted me.
I can make you talk about it if you'd like, because even the Bible points to us being in a simulation as we are created in God's image. But we don't have to go down that path.
Well, we won't, but it's a guy like you that I knew that will know things. It'd be gamers, guys who are gamers, and I knew what audience he was trying to appeal to. And I just thought, you know what? Those guys are going to think me a fraud immediately because they've been thinking on this and they have questions and ideas, and you're going to make reference to something or, ask me what I think about what Isaac Asimov said or something. And I'm not going to know anything about it. So guys, I'm as I said to them, I'm your guy on this topic, this topic, this topic, and this topic. But I don't want to just come on there and pontificate and not really have anything to say. So that's one thing that I try to do, which has served me well. The second is before I start talking about a subject, I try to do a deep dive on it. And if there are a lot of words that have been abused since COVID, expert is one of them. The second is research. People think they Google something. I researched it. No, you Googled it. There's a difference. And their research, I was trained to do real research. And part of that for me is, so for instance, when we were engaging atheism, I went, and sat in Richard Dawkins' home. I didn't just read his book and was crossing swords with him or Hitchens or debated Daniel Dennett or whatever. Same with Islam. I debated Muslims. I want to know what they think, what they believe. I want to get inside their heads and not just simply, hear something 2 or 3 times removed, from that. And so when I began addressing the issue of, say, human trafficking, which is basically what's been happening on our southern border, I started spending a lot of time in Central and South America. When I started addressing the issue of Christian persecution, Christians, you probably saw the story of 70 Christians being beheaded in the Congo in recent days. I've been in West Africa, and let me tell you, that kind of stuff goes on all the time and almost never captures a headline in the West. Point is, I try to immerse myself in those things, and when it's necessary, go to those places and engage those people and see those things so I can talk about it knowledgeably.
We definitely put some effort into doing some real research on topics before we talk about them. We don't just fire off hip. We'll go to government websites and look up old documents, and we'll dig stuff up and look at different people's perspectives, and we try to really just celebrate and debate everything great, and so I think we do a good job of that, boys.
Good for you. That's the way to do it.
We try to do a good job of coming with accurate takes, or at least playing devil's advocate sometimes to try to get to the bottom of what an idea is or what a solution could be to certain problems. So
well, keep doing it. Keep doing it that way.
We purposely play devil's advocate for a comedic effect. So in order to do that, you have to actually, read the other side at least and understand what they're doing.
Well, I hope you didn't perceive me as saying you guys don't do that. So
No, not at all.
I'm saying that a lot of the commentators, the talking heads that you see on TV, take something like The View. They haven't a clue what they're talking about most of the time. And it's just, it's one thing when you're interviewing people who are knowledgeable of that. That's a different thing. And that's what you guys, that's a part of what you guys do. It's quite another to present yourself as an expert, on an issue. And I just see far too much of that.
And that's why we have guests like you on. We want to, learn what you know, and it inspires us and helps, us to consider other lines of thought and lines of research. So, yeah, it's great. It's great.
I think a big part as well is like not doing the gotcha. not being like not bringing somebody on just because you disagree with them. You don't have to have a point to be like, hey, look, I got you, Larry. Like, you know what I mean? It would be kind of like a dickhead way to run an interview, I think.
That was the word I was just about to use, and that's happened to me a few times. And you see, the bigger television shows, they have their producers who I always say speak to you like, "Come Hansel, come Gretel, come in. I love children," and they always present themselves as though they love you and love who you are. And the next thing you know, you go live, and guy immediately comes out swinging at you, and you're going, "What the hell?" This wasn't what I thought this was all about. So that kind of thing does happen a lot.
And then they don't even let you answer the question. They'll hit you with a question that takes like a significant amount of time for you to answer, and then they'll cut you off right where they think they can get a clip. Oh, perfect. He said something we could take out of context. Let's cut him right there.
It's happened to me on BBC, very famously or infamously in my own life. That happened with BBC. I was doing an interview with, you talk about a real douchebag, a guy by the name of James O'Brien on a show called Newsnight. And about the book, I was just talking about The Faith of Christopher Hitchens, my book. And he's just coming straight at me. And then they bring another guy on and cut my mic off. So I can't even respond. So the guy's just allowed to trash me without me even being able to respond. I finally just took the mic off and left. I thought it's just no point in me even being here. If you want to have a real discussion, let's have it. And if you want to fight me, I can take it, but you got to let me fight.
Well, maybe not anymore with all this USAID stuff. Let's get into some of the areas of let's just say research and discussion that you have. Or actually, real quick, so now you have a podcast, and it's called Ideas Have Consequences. I just want to ask real quick, what's the concept of the podcast, and what is that name? I really love that name, Ideas Have Consequences. Where does that come from? What's the theme of the podcast that you do?
Well, it's actually the name of a fairly famous book. I say fairly because if I were to ask people out here in this piazza, I doubt very many of them would know, but among academic types, it has a bit of a reputation. Ideas Have Consequences by Richard Weaver. And that book was written, I'm not entirely sure when it was written, maybe in the 50s, perhaps in the 40s. And Weaver was a very thoughtful guy, very interesting fellow. But I think that term has probably been floated around, I suspect, for centuries, that phrase. And I like it because the concept behind the show is to demonstrate to people how ideas transform our world in a very practical way. So, for example, I have attended for the last few years the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, where you have billionaires, heads of state, policy wonks all show up at that place, and they pontificate for a week all of their often very cracked ideas, and they themselves are insulated from those ideas. Okay, so those ideas don't affect them. And so I'm there at a place like Davos where, to use a gun analogy. Can we talk about guns? Where the ideas are chambered. And then I go downrange to where those ideas have become policy and impact the lives of millions of people. So let's take something that I've spent the last several years engaging on. It's taken me some very dangerous and some very interesting places, open borders. So these are people who are, always pontificating, about how wonderful, open borders would be. And I find myself in Colombia, South America, and Panama, and Brazil, and Costa Rica, Mexico, so on, following this flood, these migrant caravans that are making their way to the United States, and where many of them just simply disappear, tens of thousands of them, probably hundreds of thousands of them, just disappear. In places like the Darien Gap, for instance, the Hotel California, as I call it, of jungles, where if you disappear, no, nobody's coming looking for you. There's no record of your existence. There's no roads into Darien. Every kind of pestilence, every kind of danger, awaits you in that place. Indigenous people, cartel, militia, you name it, and bodies are just, they just disappear off into the jungle. And anyway, and where I find myself talking to some of these people and saying, look, have you been to any of these places? You're talking about how wonderful it is that X is happening. And I've gone and I've seen it firsthand. Have you? Have you actually been? So, for example, last year, there's a funny progression of photographs. Just coincidentally, it wasn't coincidental that I went here, but what happened was coincidental. I had decided that I wanted to go and go to the Polish-Ukrainian border and to engage with refugees, war refugees coming out of Ukraine into Poland, and see what was happening to these people. I've been in Ukraine and Russia many times, and so now I was in Poland to see what was happening with these people. And from there, I went to the World Economic Forum. And the way I go to the World Economic Forum, guys, is it's like $25,000 to $50,000 to pay for everything. I'll pay for anything, and I just walk into every building like I own it. And most of the time, I get away with that. And the next thing you know, I'm sitting and I'm listening to former British Prime Minister Theresa May with her Ukrainian, lapel pin, or, they're all talking about how wonderful Ukraine is, and Ukraine is not wonderful. And she's talking about all the things they're doing for Ukrainian refugees who are pouring into Poland. And I kind of sort of raising my hand and saying, I'm probably the only person in the room here who's actually been there. I've talked to these people and they tell me you're not doing a thing for them. Have you been there, Miss May? And so that's just sort of an example of what I'm talking about, where I'm trying to show people, here's what's being said, here's what's being done, here's the idea of diversity, here's the reality of diversity, here's the idea of tolerance, here's the reality of tolerance, here's the idea of being able to do anything you want sexually, and then how that's actually translating into the culture and devastating, annihilating lives. So that's the idea behind it. And I try to do it from a Christian perspective, because to me, it's the only coherent worldview.
Man, I have so many questions from what you've just discussed. And I did watch.
Feel like a mosquito on a nudist beach. You just go right at it.
And I did watch that episode last night. That was one of the episodes I watched, was your WEF. Okay, so a couple of things about the WEF. So yes, like what you're talking about. There's ideas, and then there's the actual reality of the situation and how it manifests. From your experience going, actually, the first thing I want to ask you is, you said you were just walking right in, and I've heard this throughout my life. One is better to ask forgiveness than permission. That's one idea. The other is, if you just do something with enough authority, you can get away with murder if you wanted to. So I want to ask you, was this something that is natural to you? Are you someone that's just like, you know what, I'm just going to do this and let's just see what happens? Or what is it, something that you learned over the years?
Let's ask her. Can I ask her quickly? She can't hear you, but I'll ask her. Hey, Lori, these guys are asking. They're saying, you walking into places, and like you own it, like the World Economic Forum, or as I just did in Cairo at USAID office. They're asking, is that something that's just natural to your personality, or did you acquire it? How would you respond to that? She says it's natural to his personality. That's her response to that. I would say that, could I have done that when I was, 25? Probably not, because you just wouldn't look the part, right? You need a few gray hairs to kind of get away with it. That helps. But honestly, just acting like you belong somewhere. And I'm not, my work takes me from the highest of government levels and society to the lowest of the low. So I'm used to hanging out with both, and that helps, because I'm not, I'm not intimidated, rubbing elbows with Theresa May, for instance, or, some billionaires. That doesn't bother me. But I'm also equally at home, talking to the desperately, desperately poor and downtrodden, what Jesus called the least of these. And he meant that affectionately. He didn't mean it condescendingly, of this world. And so that's helpful. But there's a way of carrying yourself that suggests I belong here, and you shouldn't ask me any questions. So it's members of my staff like to say that I have Jedi mind tricks. I don't really think I have Jedi mind tricks. I just think it's just a matter of just, I mean, listen, Davos, there are a lot of people there, and with, as I say, more than more than 115 billionaires, usually somebody young, who's standing at the door. And ironically, the WEF, for all their love of AI and technology, they're remarkably analog, when it comes to I mean, the WEF is so, you would think they would give you a bracelet, a brain chip that you have to have, to get into anything. They just check names off of, a clipboard. And I just walk right past those people. And with all those billionaires, who's to say I don't own the building? And usually they don't question you. I think it ironic. It's actually interesting. This year, I was, because Davos, Switzerland in winter, it's the highest city of Europe, and it's cold in January in Davos, Switzerland. In winter, I mean, it's very, very cold. So people are wearing lanyards, that identify them, but they're also wearing big, heavy coats, right? And so people aren't necessarily looking for the lanyard, the identification, because it's kind of assumed it's under the jacket, right? And ironically, this year, I nearly got busted by two high school students, two savvy high school students that I was chatting with. And they said, "Hey, where's your ID?" And I said, "Hey, you cheeky kids, you run along."
Two WEF brown shirts ratting you out, man.
They were actually very nice. They were very nice and articulate kids, but they were very pro WEF. And I just thought, man, I wish I had a month to deprogram these boys, because
Good articulate thought police.
100%.
The perfect squares.
That's something you talk about a lot in your show, right? Is sort of the younger generations, Gen Z, and how sort of the ideas that come out of something like the WEF has influenced youth culture. And so I'm curious, because I was in New York last year for a project that I was working on with my brother. It involved interviewing younger people. I'm not afraid to say they're younger than me. What are you going to do? You're going to age, all right?
How old are you?
I'm 42.
Okay, and then we have one here is 30, and how about you?
I'm 35.
Okay, so just straight down. Okay, so you're just 5 years, 5 years. Very good. All right, continue.
Yeah. So my thought was, when I'm in New York, I got to do some customer interviews with Gen Z. That was the audience for the product that we were working on. And I thought they were going to be, like you said, like you're saying, WEF, diversity, DEI, all this stuff. And I found that a lot of them wasn't the case. They're kind of like, they're just kind of going along with it because that's just what's in the air around them. It's not really that they truly believe these things. In a lot of cases, I found, which was most surprising, was that they have a lot of nostalgia for, past eras, when I was growing up in the 90s or the 80s or 70s, where people could just, express ideas and have the exchange of ideas, and they didn't feel like they had a gun to their head, talking about something that, and that there's all this taboo around everything. So I don't know. What is your thought on Gen Z? Are they captured by this DEI progressive leftist sort of ideology, or do you feel that they're an open book and you can, present ideas to them and that they're open to it?
Well, I think it's a mix. I think some of them are very much captured, and others of them are very open. But I'll just use this as an example. Used to, when I would speak on a college campus, say mostly to millennials, let's say, and if I have my dates right, two of you are millennials and one of you is Gen Zer. One of you's right in the middle, could go either way, could be counted as a millennial or a Gen Zer. But we've got one Gen Zer for sure here. And used to, they might line up at the mics and want to take me on, and they might have silly arguments, but at least they could formulate an argument. They were ready to argue. They were ready to hear you out respectfully and then fight you. With Gen Zers, they've been taught by their radical professors just to shut you down, not to hear you at all, and just to react emotionally. They believe that they've been taught to believe that their emotions are their truth, that's as valid as an argument. The way they feel about something is all that matters, not the reality of it. And that's hard to to reason with people who have been taught like that, because listen, I'm a Gen Xer, and my generation, interestingly enough, my generation is kind of notorious, maybe notorious is the wrong word, because I think it's actually a good thing, but we're more like our grandparents. You see, the baby boomers were my parents. My parents, actually, neither of them were my mother's a baby boomer, but my dad was, World War II generation. He was significantly older than my mother. But Gen Xers like me, baby boomers, people the age of, like, Joe Biden, the Clintons, they're the baby boomers. They're the ones who are mostly the parents of my generation. And my generation, by and large, rebelled against them and said, we don't like you guys. We like some of your music, but we don't like you guys. And we actually do like our country, and we don't want to burn it to the ground. And we have a lot of respect for the world. We grew up with a lot of respect for the World War II generation, you see. So we're different. We're very different. You'd think that we would be even more radical than, the baby boomers were, but we weren't. We started going back in another direction. I grew up in the era of Ronald Reagan. When I was 13, Reagan was when Reagan became president, and I was campaigning in our little school, poli-sci class. I was campaigning for Reagan. It was in 8th grade. So this is a very different kind of generation. Millennials and Gen Zers, I think, have been failed. It's particularly Gen Zers have been failed terribly, frequently by their parents and almost entirely by their government, and have been radicalized in many respects. And my youngest son, Zachary, who is, gosh, what is Zachary now, Lori? 28, 29? He's a small business owner. He's a Christian, has strong opinions, very alpha male, and hates everything woke. I mean, hates it with a passion. And that's because I think his generation feels like that crap was foisted upon them. And some of them, absorbed it all. And he's of an element of Gen Z that says, when we get the chance and are old enough to destroy this stuff, we're going to, because we're not buying into your nonsense that guys can be girls and girls can be guys. We're not buying into the nonsense that a guy can, participate in female sports. We're not buying into the nonsense that your perverse views of children and things of this nature. So there is an element of Gen Z and millennials that I have a lot of hope for, because I think they have been bombarded like, gamma rays, just, from birth with garbage. And yet some of them have had enough sense to say, I hate this. I don't want it. And I think that the data is showing that. I mean, how many of them voted for Donald Trump? A ton of them voted for Donald Trump. How many of them are fans of guys like Elon Musk, for example, who, in other words, not necessarily Christian or conservative in that sense, but they don't like Justin Trudeau. and they don't like Kamala Harris, and they're not interested in going in that direction, and they're ready. They're ready to see strength, and I think we're starting to see a return to where being a strong male is cool again, where testosterone is cool again, where being able to voice your opinion is cool again. I think these are things that we're seeing, and I see them as good things, because again, I don't think of myself, maybe you guys do, but I don't think of myself as a real rough guy. And yet, when I would find myself on a campus speaking to some Gen Zers, I remember a professor saying to me that I bruised his students. And I was like, bruise them? With what? Truth? With what? Because I told them what the real world is like? I mean, that's it to me. I can never imagine ever being told when I was a kid, or let's reverse it. If I had gone to one of my teachers as a kid and said, I feel bruised by what you said, I'm not sure I wouldn't have gotten backhand and been told to go sit down and shut up. It's a ridiculous idea.
I'm Gen Z. My mom always used to say, stop crying before I give you something to cry about, so.
I mean, you mentioned Elon, we're USAID. I know that your most recent adventure, well, maybe you can describe exactly what's going on, but you're an enemy of the Egyptian state. Is that what I understand? What is so I did see the episode that you did on USAID. You've actually been talking about it for a while now and how it influences the world. Can you speak on USAID and what you've kind of discovered over the years about it, and maybe the situation happening now with Elon and all this government cutting and things like that?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, excuse me, gentlemen, as I mentioned earlier, I have been following migrant caravans all over South America, through Central America, up to Mexico City, where they then board a train that they refer to as La Bestia, Beast. It's a freight train carrying cars mostly, and they get on the top of it and they ride it the 600 miles north to the U.S. border, sometimes called the train of death, because a lot of people don't make that journey alive. And I started doing that, fellows, because when Trump was in his first term, the border was a very big issue then. It was becoming a much bigger one. And everyone kept talking about the border crisis, the border crisis, the border crisis. If you go to type that in on an internet search, it's going to auto-populate crisis, something like that. And I thought, no one is asking the question, what's going on the other side of the border? Meaning, if you're sitting on your front porch of your ranch, let's just say you own one, and all of a sudden there's a stampede of cattle across your property, wouldn't you ask what's going on over there? Are there poachers there? Are there predators over there? Is there a wildfire? Why are they suddenly, stampeding across my lawn? And I thought, why is our border suddenly being stampeded? What's happening in South America? So I made probably 12 to 15 trips south of the border and began going into migrant camps, and began going into cartel country, jungle, you name it, to find the answer to that question. And it took me down a real rabbit hole. I mean, first of all, part of the issue was, you see, CNN, for whom I've done a lot of work in the past, but CNN gave the ridiculous answer to the question, it was due to climate change. And I thought, that's complete nonsense. It has to do with the fact that numerous countries in South America were falling like dominoes to Marxism in shady 2020 presidential election-like elections south of the border, meaning elections where the CIA had some involvement in Brazil, Honduras, Peru, Chile, Colombia. They're all, moving in the direction of becoming future Venezuela's, Venezuela, the richest country in South America, that now, people can't feed themselves there. And hence, most of them, no, I say most of them, rather a plurality of the migrants that I engaged in, if not a majority of them, were Venezuelan, because they're escaping that country, making their way across Colombia and eventually through Darien Gap to the United States. Well, I've discovered that USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, supposed to be kind of like the governmental equivalent of, say, Samaritan's Purse, was running it. And their public window front was that they do all these good things for people and that they are trying to stem the tide of immigration. They were doing nothing of the kind. They were running a massive human trafficking op, and they were working hand in hand with the cartels. So I'm telling this story in an interview. I'm explaining this.
Wait, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but when you say human trafficking, I mean, what is that? And not to get into anything really ugly, oh, maybe there's no way around it. I'm just saying, what is that? Like, what do you mean by that precisely? Is it trafficking for what purposes?
Okay, and it's a great question, actually, and an important question. Human trafficking can be done for a lot of purposes. My first book was on Ukraine, and it was about, in part, about human trafficking in that country. And in that case, it was for sordid sexual purposes. It's, the demand in the West, the demand in Arab countries was not for Black Africans. It was for European girls, and Ukrainian, Eastern European women are often, noted for being very beautiful women, and so there's a market for them, and so children, and also a demand for little boys too. They are being trafficked to the West into parts unknown, just disappeared. They still are. It's Ukraine is a primary hub of trafficking, and I'm sure that that's played a huge role in one of the reasons our own government has had such an interest there. But in South America, the purpose for it is very different. The purpose is to flip red states into blue states. So you import voters, you bring them in, and you overwhelm an infrastructure. You overwhelm a city, and you ballot harvest, meaning legally they can't vote, right? But Democrats don't care anything about what is or isn't legal. So you import them, and then you seed them all over the country. And eventually, states like Georgia, bringing in loads of them into Atlanta, you flip Georgia, a historically deep red state, suddenly becomes a blue one. And then Texas, is now kind of in play, and, this kind of thing. So moving them to Florida. So they're shipping them all over the country and actually flying them in. So that's one of the reasons. That's the reason why USAID was doing this, and it's because USAID is a rogue agency that receives roughly 50 billion U.S. taxpayer dollars per year that have been largely unaccounted for. And so I was witnessing this firsthand, where they're working with the cartels. And I'm doing an interview a few weeks ago, maybe more now, I've kind of lost track, but on Steve Bannon's War Room. And it just so happens the President of the United States is watching the interview, and he texts Bannon and says, "Tell Larry that this is extremely useful information, and we will destroy them. We will hold these people accountable for what they're doing." And from there, I went to Switzerland, to the World Economic Forum, and then to Cairo. And while I was in Cairo, I just decided, you know what? The President of the United States, by this time, had issued an executive order shutting down, among other things, USAID. And a judge ruled just a couple of days ago that the President of the United States has the authority to do it. And that's because they're a very nefarious organization committing a great deal of evil. Do they do any good things? For sure, they have to. That's the window front, where they want the photo op that's showing them handing out grain, to the poor, the hungry, that sort of thing. But that's not what they're about. That's not what they're about. And so while I was in Cairo, I decided to pay a visit to USAID Cairo. And all hell broke loose when I was there, and it became, nearly a major international incident. But interestingly enough, that episode has reverberated all the way up to the highest levels of our government, asking me, getting calls, Larry, what the hell is going on in USAID Cairo? And I'd say nothing good.
Yeah. That is crazy.
Is there anything that you could tell us that you found there that you could summarize without being too direct?
You know, here's the funny thing. What I didn't really find anything. You see, what happened, guys, was this. I went with my driver. He's an Egyptian man. His name's Muhammad. I call him Mario because if you're at a shopping mall and you say Muhammad, like half the men are going to turn and look at you. So it's the most popular name in every Muslim majority country for males, and so I call him Mario because he's my driver. It's a reference to Mario Andretti, and he likes the nickname. And so Mario and I, we drive over to USAID, and they raise the barrier and let us in, probably assuming by looking at me that I have actual government business there. Again, this is the same thing of just walking into a place like you own it. And we approached the barrier like I was in charge of the place, and what do you know? Barrier goes up, we drive straight in. And then I walk right past the security guard who's standing outside, and I go straight into the building, and there's another security guard there who says, do you have an appointment? He looks a little alarmed when he sees me come in. And I said, no, I don't. He said, can I see your ID? And I give him my driver's license, not my passport. And he looks at it, hands it back, and he says, what's your business here? I said, well, I'm a writer. And I said, I've been tracking the activities of USAID all over South America. And I was in Cairo, thought I'd see what you guys do here. And are you complying with the President of the United States' very public order to cease operations? And they panicked. And he leans forward to me. There's a camera, and watching. And he says, I don't think I should talk to you. And I said, you probably shouldn't. But maybe you could talk to me when you leave the office or somebody else here. He calls his supervisor, and I could feel things kind of going sideways. He asked for my ID again. I said, you've seen it once, not giving it to you again. In the third world, a way of detaining you is to take your passport or your identification, because not only does it tell them who you are and it makes it easy for them to find where you are, but it means you can't leave the country. So it's like you don't ever hand over, your credentials, your identification on.
That's a good tip. We might need to clip that for people traveling.
And most people don't travel the way I do, but anyway, so I left, got in a van, we drove away. So a week later, I decided we would go back because I told the story of what had happened on my first trip in a Twitter thread that got 12 million views. It just went bonkers wild as I was explaining this, because all eyes, Elon Musk and the President of the United States, Doge, were on USAID. So I thought, you know what, I'll go by there one more time, but this time I'm not going to enter into the building, and I'm not going to enter into the compound. And this is important. We're just going to drive by the USAID compound, because I want to confirm a couple of impressions that I had of the place. I want to verify them. So we're driving there, but this time in a different vehicle. I was thinking they wouldn't recognize me, and even if they did, it doesn't matter because I'm not entering into the compound. But they did recognize me, and they came out beyond the gate and they stopped the vehicle. And these are the videos that I posted online, and this went crazy at this point. Told the driver to get out of the vehicle, and it was wise for Mario to do that. He's an Egyptian national, and he had nothing to do with it. He's just my driver. He wasn't trying to violate anything. And they got out of the car. He got out of the car, and they told me to hand over my phone because I had been taking video, and to hand over my passport. And I said, not going to happen. And I'm not getting out of the car. And they kept trying to get me to go inside the compound. And I said, I'm not going inside the compound. So then they told Mario to drive me the 30 or so meters through the barrier, past the barrier. They raised the arm when I first drive through, and I said, "You're not going to do it." And he didn't. I said, "We're staying, right here." And they'd indicated that we couldn't drive off. If we did, they would fire on the vehicle. So somebody inside USAID, you got to bear in mind, this is what's weird about all this. You asked me, what did I discover? What I discovered is sheer panic. This is just a bizarre reaction. If I had walked in and they had said, we try to help people. Answer to your first question, people in need. And yeah, the president of the United States shut us down. It's a bummer, but we're in the process of closing shop. There's no story. But see, this was Barbara Streisand effect. This went bonkers. So these are security that have no authority beyond the barrier. They are rent-a-cops who work for USAID and are paid for with my tax dollars. So somebody inside USAID is giving them the orders, and guess what? They call Cairo police and Egyptian state police, which is the brutal Egyptian state police, who are Egypt's equivalent of the KGB. So why in the world is the secret police summoned on me? So they come, surround the car, tell me to get out of the car. I said, I'm not moving from the car. And by your own admission, I've done nothing wrong. I haven't violated any of your laws. I haven't done anything. Do you have an Egyptian government permit to take pictures of Egyptian government buildings? I said, no, but that's an American government building, and I'm an American. And I could tell he didn't know what to do with that. So they started suggesting the security guards had suggested I was a terrorist. And I said, look, that's ridiculous. You guys don't even believe that. You see, I don't have any weapons. I mean, look at me, and I'm thinking to myself, not since Stonewall Jackson have Presbyterians got around blowing things up, so I thought, that's not true. But Egyptian state police, secret police began suggesting that I was guilty of espionage, that I was a spy. And I said, I freely admit it. I'm here spying on my government, not yours. What authority you guys have to deal with that? I don't think you do. And they still hadn't charged me with anything. And one of the things actually pretty funny in all this was I at one point I called the U.S. Embassy, and the guy on the other end was not helpful at all. And I'm telling him, Egyptian state security, the NSA, as they're called, National Security Agency, not to be confused with the NSA in the United States. I'm in a standoff with them. And the guy on the other end said, have they arrested you? And I said, no. He said, drive off. And I thought, that's such an American answer to a non-American situation. I said, I don't think you're quite understanding here. These guys are going to absolutely riddle his car with bullets if I start to drive off. He said, but they haven't formally charged you. And I said, I understand, but I don't think you seem to understand that secret police in the third world operate by their own rules. And so I just hang up from that guy. And all the time I'm taking, I'm kind of doing things to take a little bit of video here and there. And I start firing off video to friends and family in case I disappear, and if inquiries are made of the Egyptian government and they say, well, gosh, he fell in the night. It happens all the time. They can say, the hell he did. We know exactly where he was. So they begin, they're demanding my phone. I'm telling them I'm not giving it. And I'm trying to force the issue here. I figure the only cards I have to play here are, they have no idea what I have seen and haven't seen, who I have and haven't communicated it to. That's one thing. The second thing is I'm trying to force the issue. I'm not going to cooperate and let them Khashoggi me. I don't know if you remember Jamal Khashoggi, but the Saudi journalist who went into a Saudi embassy and was murdered inside, and little pieces of him were taken out and disposed of. And so I thought, I'm not going to be Khashoggi'd here by my own government, and I'm not entering the compound. So they're trying to get me to go into the compound. And so I'm firing off these videos. And when they're not looking, I go into my deleted I go into my Photos app and I delete the videos. And just in case whoever looks at my phone is savvy enough, I go down to recently deleted and I delete them there too. I trash them. And so what ended up happening is, as I say to them, listen, you can't have the phone, but you guys are so worried that I've taken video. I'll hold the phone. I'll open it. And see, they tried pushing it to my face. And I said, that's not going to help you, because precisely for this reason, I've never activated facial recognition. You need an it's clumsy. People say to me, gosh, Larry, you waste so much time punching in a code. I say, wait, what, 2 seconds? You could hold this phone over my cold, dead body and you're not getting in it because you need to have a code. So I've never done, I said, but I'll open it where you can't see. And then I'll hold it where you can look, see if I have any videos. I don't have any videos. So they call over a guy that, I kid you not, looked exactly like Freddie Mercury in leather jacket and aviator sunglasses. And he must be their tech guy. So they call him over and he scrolls through my photos. And just as I thought he might, he goes down to recently deleted, looks in there, and all he's seeing, are, it's quite funny actually, very touristy things, the pyramids and, something. He did pause very briefly on a belly dancer, on a Nile River cruise. So this Freddie Mercury was not gay. I'm pretty sure of that. But he's scrolling and then he turns and says in Arabic to the state police, to the secret police guy, nothing. And this went on for about 2.5 hours, and eventually they did release me. But because I still had my passport, I left the country. And the next day they showed up at my hotel and began asking staff about me, who I'd talked to, where I'd been, this kind of thing. And the staff told him, look, he's gone. He's out of the country, which was true. And so they began searching the car very carefully for what, I have no idea. Could have been planting evidence. But yeah, and so all that went sideways too. And the next thing I know, I'm getting calls from people, very high in our government who are saying, what's going on? And got to bear in mind, there's a war in Gaza. There's a lot of saber rattling by the Egyptians towards the Israelis. Netanyahu has claimed that the Egyptians are preparing for war, and it could very well be that I stumbled upon, something that in some way is connected to this, that they were terrified that I might know. What I will say is this much is 100% true. This is the behavior not of a benevolence agency. Is the behavior of an intelligence agency. And with me trying to force the issue, guys, the terrorism charge, which the secret police never ran with, it was security who wanted to say that. And the NSA guys, I think, thought that's got no legs. We've established that he's a writer and an author, and, that just doesn't make any sense. Nobody's going to believe that. But I thought, the espionage, charging me with espionage is going to be problematic for you guys too, because it's a tacit admission. There's more than rice and canned goods on the other side of that wall. Do you guys really want to charge me with that? Do you want to admit that? Is that the game we're going to play? And so they eventually did let me go, but it was pretty dicey. It was pretty dicey, and I've had my share of run-ins.
You're brave, man. I'd be sweating bullets if I was in that situation. I don't know what I'd even do, but it seemed like you were pretty cool under pressure.
It's not my first rodeo, as they say. I've had plenty of encounters with the security apparatus and a variety of countries. And usually, if you stay calm and hold to your guns, so to speak, you will be okay. And if you're dealing with people who are young, the higher up it gets kicked, the older they become, the more senior in rank, the bleaker your prospects become. And in this case, they were older, and of course, they were again Egypt's KGB, so it was looking pretty dark there for a bit. But efforts to provoke me. At no time was I physically resisting or name calling or shouting. I just say, look, guys, I'm showing you my passport. You can't have it, but I'll hold it and let you photograph, see who I am, verify my identity, that I'm a U.S. citizen. And I want to say this, it's another little pro tip for you. Not only do you not give your passport away to anybody, but at least anybody that you do not trust, but a U.S. all passports are not equal in the world. And a U.S. passport is protection. Now, it's, in this case, a thin protection. If this had happened prior to January 20, Trump's inauguration, I don't think we're having this conversation, because they would know very well that I'm no friend of the Biden administration. They're not going to send anybody to help me. But in this case, it was a real defense. If I had shown them, say, a Nigerian passport, or if I'd have been an Egyptian, you're gone. That's just it. But these guys weren't sure what to do with me, because that protection is real, and because the only two options they had were terrorism or espionage. And neither of those made any sense at all. So there you have it.
Glad you made it out.
That's a wild story. That's amazing. I mean, and so happy that everything turned out all right. And now you're sitting in Italy with your cigars and your wine and your good food, I hope, and your good wife and all that. So.
Well, I will go and have dinner here shortly with my wife, and then afterwards I'm gonna enjoy that nice cigar. But listen, there are situations, things that I do that you go into that are potentially dangerous. Very dangerous. Going into cartel country, going into into some jungle, going into some neighborhoods can be extremely dangerous. I have to say, this was not one that I thought was going to be that, because again, it's United States Agency for International Development, and if I am, let's just say I'm like Blofeld, I'm the guy who's running this, and I'm just as corrupt as I can be. The minute that security guard from my first visit calls me, I'm going to tell him yeah, we are complying with the President of the United States authority. And unfortunately, we don't have time to give him an interview. Now, that's the way to respond to that. To respond the way they did has brought huge focus on USAID Cairo. Do you see? I mean, that's just a dumb way to respond. So I guess I assumed they would be more intelligent than that, and they'd give me nothing. And that would be that, and I'd drive away. So I wasn't anticipating that I was going to end up in a standoff with the Egyptian secret police, but that's what happened. And I'm glad to say that the God I served was very gracious in answering my prayers, and those of my friends and family.
Yeah, I mean, someone's definitely looking over you, man. I have one. We're going a little long, but I actually feel like this is an important question that I really want to get your take on. I forgot about that. Okay, yeah, that question's answered again. No, we've been talking about a lot of things here. We're talking about spirituality and you entering these dangerous situations. You just said that hey, I mean, you're in a dangerous situation and you're here now, so God bless. But I guess my question with things like USAID, WEF, that type of stuff, in your view, are these people evil, or are they just in their own world, kind of living in a fantasy, and then whatever's happening as a result of that is maybe unintended consequences? What's your take on these people who are pushing all this kind of stuff?
Well, I don't want to just refer to a whole group of, everybody at USAID is evil and corrupt, or who attends or is a part of the World Economic Forum is evil and corrupt. I would say there are tiers. And let's take, for example, the WEF as an example. And by the way, in talking about walking into places like you own it, let me point out to you that walking into a place like the World Economic Forum, there's no danger in that. Okay. I walk in there. If they spot that I don't have the lanyard, they say, hey, get out of here. And that's that. Okay. USAID is a different deal. That's a Darien or a cartel town is a different deal. You see, so you have to weigh, is something worth it, the potential benefit versus the potential cost. You see, so you guys are young and you're thinking about your own lives and your own adventures. I would encourage you always to think in terms of, benefit versus cost, whatever that is. Just recently, my oldest son, who is a partner in a law firm, I say, look, you make enough money to pay someone else to clean your gutters out. You make too much money to be climbing around on the roof of your house. You fall and you break your neck. What are the cost versus the benefits? You're going to save $500? I mean, come on, don't do that. But when we're talking about, an organization, for instance, like the WEF, and this would apply to USAID as well, is you have people at the top who are the ideologues, or as I like to say on my show, ideologues, because they're kind of idiots. These are the people who are pushing ideologies, policies, philosophies that have ruinous, devastating consequences on the lives of people. And they don't care. So, for example, Ursula von der Leyen, who is the unelected president of the European Union Commission, well known in Europe, not in the United States, she arrives at the World Economic Forum in an Audi A8. Now, if you don't know what that is, the European version is much beefier than the American version, which is kind of toned down and more sissified. The European version is 585 horsepower, 12 cylinders, 3 tons of a beast of a car that gets 11 miles to the gallon. Now, just to be clear, I'd love to own an Audi A8 with 585 horsepower, but I don't go around lecturing people on their carbon footprint. And she shows up, she gets out, and she sees no hypocrisy whatsoever in going to the lectern and telling everyone that they need to eat less beef, that they need to live in smart cities, that they need to drive smart cars, they need to not fly, they need to be much more carbon friendly in the way they live. And the reason she doesn't see that is hypocritical is because they see themselves as an exception to the rule. Somebody with any conscience would go, you know what? I love my Audi, but I better not drive it to the left. I'll keep it in the car and I'll drive it some other time. That's what hypocrisy typically looks like. Somebody's a hypocrite that has a little bit of conscience. These people just think, but you don't understand. The rules don't apply to me. I can fly around privately. I'm going to eat beef. I'm not eating bugs. I mean, are you kidding? I'm not doing that. That's the way these people think. So those people at the top are evil. They're evil. The ideas they're pushing are evil, not because they've necessarily themselves killed anybody, but because they have zero regard for actual human beings. Here's a way to think about this. These are people, the typical leftist loves man in the abstract, not in the specific. You see, this was something I detected when I was a kid, when I was struggling with, am I going to be an atheist? Is that what I'm going to be? Because if I'm going to be an atheist, I'm going to be all in on atheism. Or am I going to be a Christian? And if I'm going to be a Christian, I'm all in on being a Christian. No go between for me. I'm all in one way or the other. And the thing I've always noticed about atheists, about leftists in general, is that they always talk about changing the world. the lives of millions of people. And Jesus always talked about the life of the one, the individual, the person who's right in front of you. You see, ministry, helping people, is hard work of rolling up your sleeves and getting into the grit and grime of real people's lives. If you've ever had made a mess of your own life, there have been people who said, you know what, I love you, and I'm here with you in your foxhole in the midst of this, because I love you and because I care about you, and we're going to get through this. And when you help other people, and this is a very Christian sentiment, it's Galatians chapter 6, bear ye one another's burdens. We're designed by God to do that. And it means, you know what? I'm going to help my neighbor. I'm going to help him because he's down and because he needs help. And this is going to be messy. It's going to be inconvenient. It's going to cause disruption to my life, but I'm going to do it because I'm commanded to do it. And because if the situation were reversed, I would want him to help me. You see, so a Christian view talks about people, individual people. It doesn't talk about changing the world and the millions, the faceless millions. The left always loves the abstract notion of humanity, but not man himself. That's the way they think.
They rather you serve the man, not be in servitude to like your fellow man.
100%. So they don't care that way. And that to me, so you know, at the top, you've got people like this who are evil. Then you have, you know, a middle group they're just opportunists. They're the Mark Zuckerberg. Okay. You've noticed Zuckerberg is now showing up at, you know, CPAC, and he was at the inauguration. And
He's changed, though, I thought. He's become a die-in-the-wool conservative, Larry.
he licked his finger and put it in the air, and he says that the cultural winds, not just the political ones, the cultural winds are going towards conservatism, and I'm all in on that. I'm flag waving. So there are opportunities, you know, like that. And then down at the bottom, you have usually people are very young and idealistic, and I feel compassion for them because I see them at the world. They're like the two high school students I was talking about earlier, that I felt compassion for. I thought these are bright kids who have real potential, but they've been, you know, propagandized, you know, with all this nonsense. They don't know any better. And these are often people that, in a way, it's almost funny, but I still feel a little sad about it. They're always wearing the idealistic swag, global citizen hats, and I'm a member of the World Economic Forum. And I thought, you know, these are the Hitler Youth. They're the ones who are being trained for this. They are being turned into the shop troop. So when we're talking about these groups of people, I think the ones at the top who are running the show, who are pushing the ideas, those are evil people. The people in the middle, they're kind of evil, but in a different way, because they don't really have any core convictions. They're just going to be, you know, found in the majority of no matter what's going on. And then you have the people down at the bottom who really believe the rhetoric. They think they're going to change the world. They really believe they're going to change the world. And they hear a guy like me speak, and their immediate reaction is with hate, you know, because they think I'm a fascist, you know, they'll say. And I always find myself saying to them as a historian, can you articulate for me a definition of fascism? Because actually, you are supporting fascism. You are being trained to be a fascist. But you can't even tell me what fascism is. Do you know what Marxism is? Can you explain that? Of course, they have no idea because they're just being taught to react, to feel. So I hope that answers your question.
I have a question about about the faith thing. Do you pay attention to the religious debate scene at all?
Well, you guys should do your research. For this reason, and I tease you just a bit, but I made my name in the so-called religious debates. And
I kind of know, but I'm more asking for the people.
I'm only teasing you. Guys. You don't have to do a deep dive on me. Yes, we actually, probably some of the debates you're referring to are my debates. That is to say, they're debates that either I organized or I moderated. if I didn't participate in them. So have you ever heard of a guy named John Lennox? Does that name mean anything to you? John Lennox was an Oxford University. I call him the modern C.S. Lewis. Lennox is an Oxford mathematician. I mean, he's really retired from Oxford now. He's in his 80s, but an extremely bright guy. And Lennox annihilated Dawkins in debate. And he debated Christopher Hitchens. I arranged 2 of those debates that he did with Hitchens. I myself debated Michael Shermer, the atheist founder of Skeptic magazine. I debated atheist, the late now Daniel Dennett, the cognitive scientist, author of the best-selling book Breaking the Spell. I debated him on Al Jazeera. And I debated Hitchens, of course, and there's some others I can't even remember at the moment. But a lot of those YouTube debates you'll find on my channel, actually, that have millions of views. And so, yeah, I definitely have followed those. It's very interesting you mentioned them, because the reason we're not really doing very many of them anymore is because the culture kind of moved on. And what I mean by that is this: that was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, where guys like Dawkins were ready to debate. They were willing to debate their ideas. Now, I tell Richard, your children, Richard Dawkins, your ideological children no longer think you're radical enough. They've moved past you. Kind of like BLM has nothing to do with Martin Luther King Jr. They don't like him. They don't want nothing to do with him. He wasn't radical enough for them. And so these people have moved on. And where at least there was a debate over God's existence, these people just kind of assume there isn't a God. And their modern residents, by the way, ideological residents of atheism, is in the World Economic Forum, which is what took me to the World Economic Forum. That their policies they're pushing, are you aware that they people think I just make this up? I say, absolutely not. That they want to reduce the global population from just a little more than 8 billion to less than 2 billion. And they talk about it like they're talking about, batting averages. Again, because humanity did it.
Well, I mean, that number's gone up, right? Because they used to only want it to be 800,000. So they're trying to be a little more inclusive, like everything else that they've done. Yeah.
They're progressive. They're making progress.
Well, that's where they've gone. But see, to your point, you're right, because Dr. Dennis Meadows, who's one of the quote unquote World Economic Forum agenda contributors, you can find, I have an Ideas Have Consequences episode all about this subject. And Dennis Meadows says it really should be only, less than a billion people on the planet. He said, but we might be able to make it with 2 billion. But what's fascinating to me about these people, again, is it's like the Audi A8. They never volunteer themselves.
Yeah, we need 800,000 or 800 million people. I'll be the one to go die. See you later, guys. It's never that, right? It's like, oh no, we need 800 million and one. I'll be the extra one.
They never volunteer themselves. They see themselves as the philosopher kings, like Plato's allegory of the cave. They have nothing but condescension for democracy, and they have nothing but condescension for the people, and they see themselves as ones who have, by some, right of their genetic makeup, to govern the rest of us.
Well, hopefully that's not going to happen, but we got to fight the good fight.
Let's hope not.
Listen, Larry, you are fighting the good fight for sure, in what you're doing. And
hey, see that laser behind me?
Oh shoot, somebody shoot a laser in here.
Well, no. They sell them down here. Do you see that? You see that hitting my screen now?
Yeah.
Somebody down there has spotted me, and the guys down there sell them. You see it going up and down the building behind me?
Yeah.
Rome comes alive in the nighttime.
They're trying to take you out, Larry. They're trying to take you out.
Duck.
Probably Egyptian secret police down there, trying to get a beat on me.
The USAID Gestapo has found you. Well, listen, as we said before, this is the GOAT Show. We toast the goats on the show, Larry. You are a goat. So here's a toast to you. Keep fighting the good fight. Cheers.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
For anybody who may be watching
Good
this.
to be with you. I've enjoyed you.
Oh,
You're good guys, and I hope any of you who do not know Jesus Christ, sounds very I don't know, these days maybe a little bit trite, but maybe you've heard that many times. But I would encourage you to read Scripture, and I would tell you to start with the Gospel of John. It's a good place to start, and think very seriously on your purpose in this life, your purpose in this world, and a very exciting adventure awaits you. So I hope that that's the direction any of you who have not already made that decision will make. And if you have any questions, just fire off an email to me, and I'll do my best to try to be a good resource to you.
perfect.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll be putting all of your information in the show notes. So for anybody who is watching and you want to find out more about Larry, just go to the YouTube description. We'll have all the links there. We'll put your email too, if you don't mind, Larry. I mean, if that's
no, don't do that. Well, don't do that.
Open source an email.
Please
okay, no problem.
Please don't do that. But people can go. You can go to my website, LarryAlexTaunton.com. That's TAUNTON. You can go to the podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast over on YouTube. YouTube has had their foot on our throat for quite a while, but I'm feeling like they're starting to take it off a little bit. I'm feeling like that they are sensing the cultural winds are changing too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because where our podcast started out was, hundreds of thousands of views, and then YouTube suppressed us, but the last couple of ones are way back up again. So it seems like something maybe is changing there too. So we can hope.
Yeah, hope so.
Well, we could test it. We'll run an ad on this video and see if they let us run an ad on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good
I forgot about YouTube ads. Let's see what they say. I could be. I've had friends who say to me, whenever I tweet you, I suddenly get suppressed. And but I'm not sure that that's happening anymore. So let's hope. Let's hope that you have the opportunity to speak very freely. And listen, I've grown up in a great country. I love my country. And it's part of the reason I do what I do, because I want my children, who are, again, about your age. My oldest is 36. My youngest is 27. I want my children, and I want their children, to have what I had, which was to grow up free and be proud of my country, and to choose to worship freely, to choose to vote freely, to choose to not live under a corrupt, totalitarian regime. That's what I want. And I want that for you guys too.
Well, Larry, thank you so much for all that, and for being such a wonderful guest. Again, anybody out there, Larry Taunton, check the show notes, the description, and we'll have all his links there. Definitely follow him. And hopefully you continue on your adventures, and Godspeed on all that.
Thank you guys. Much appreciated.
And with that, Fresh, before we head on out of here, what do the young goats out there, what do they need to do?
They got to like, subscribe, hit the bell, drop a comment, send it to your mom, your aunt.
Read some Bible, read some John, like Larry's saying. Come on now. Find your spirituality or your lack thereof, either way. And
have a great night.